E finalmente. Bom, tentei streamar no jogo do Brasil com a Coreia, né? 4-1. Mas, obviamente, o YouTube e a Twitch me deu ban. Mas consegui, pelo menos no YouTube, fazer uma live de leitura. Esse é o livro Brave New World, nessa edição aqui. O autor é Aldous Huxley. Eu tô na página 38, acho no capítulo 2, tá em inglês. Não sei se dá pra ver, eu parei bem aqui. E eu vou tentar ler, talvez em voz alta, pra praticar meu inglês. O meu inglês que eu já falo um pouco, mas faz tempo, tá bem enferrujado meu inglês. Então, vou praticar um pouco. E depois dessa vitória do Brasil, que bom que eu comprei de chocolate. Vou comer também, né? Passar vontade. É isso. Pausing for a moment, outside the door of the director's room, Bernard drew a deep breath and prepared to meet the dislike and disapproval, which he was certain of finding inside. Minha cachorrinha vai fazer um barulho aqui. Esse negócio. Kira, sai pra lá. Então esse livro fala sobre um mundo, é tipo 1984 do George Orwell. Fala de um mundo paralelo onde as pessoas são programadas desde o nascimento, desde da gravidez, né? Porque é uma gravidez artificial, onde não existe paz. E todo mundo tem que servir o governo e não tem tanta liberdade, assim. Como se fosse uma ditadura, né? A permit for you to sign, director, he said, as coolly as possible, and laid the paper on the writing table. The director looked at him rather angrily, but the stamp of the World Controller's office was at the head of the paper, and the signature of the World Controller must have gone across the bottom. Everything was perfectly in order. The director could not refuse. He wrote his initial under it in pencil and was about to give back the paper without comment when his eyes was caught by something written in the body of the permit. For the New Mexico reservation, he said. In his tone, the face he lifted to Bernard expressed a kind of worried surprise. Surprised by his surprise, Bernard nodded. There was a silence. The director leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. How long ago was it? He said, speaking more to himself than to Bernard. 20 years, I suppose. Near 25. I must have been your age. He smoothed his head. Bernard felt extremely uncomfortable. He wondered what the director would say next. I had the same idea as you, the director went on. Wanted to have a look at the Sabbaths. Got a permit for New Mexico and went there to my summer holiday with the girl I was having at the moment. She was a beta minus. Então todas as pessoas, personagens aqui, tem um tipo de humano. Acho que tem o delta, alfa, beta. No quesito superior, né? Cada um é criado de uma forma, é condicionado para ser superior nessa sociedade, desde o nascimento. And I think he shut his eyes. I think she had yellow hair. And how she had a lovely body, a particular lovely body. E também não existe monogamia, não existe casais, porque não existe pais. As crianças são geradas por objetos, né? Por tecnologia. E aí não é incentivado a ter um casal, a ter uma família. Então todo mundo é de todo mundo. Se você fica com um cara por mais de um mês, tem até uma personagem que faz isso, o governo começa a espiar, porque você está conspirando contra o governo. I remember that. Well, we went there and we looked at savages and rode about on horses and all that. And then it was almost the last day of my holiday then. Well, she got lost. We had gone riding one of those horrible mountains and it was terribly hot, without any wine, and after lunch we went to sleep. Or at least I did. She must have gone for a walk alone. Whatever she did do, when I woke up she wasn't there, and the most horrible thunderstorm I've ever seen was just bursting on us, and it poured and crashed and flashed, and the horses broke loose and ran away, and I fell down, trying to catch them, and hurt my knee so that I could hardly walk. But still, I searched and I shouted and I searched, but there was no sign of her. And then I thought she must have gone back to the rest house by herself. So I went down to the valley by the way we had come. My knee was very painful and I lost my soma. It took me hours. I didn't. Eu acho que soma é uma coisa que eles comem para ter energia. Alguma coisa como se fosse uma comida. It took me hours. I didn't get back to the rest house till after midnight. When she wasn't there, she wasn't there, the director repeated. There was a silence. Well, he went on at the last. The next day there was a search, but we couldn't find her. She must have fallen down a crack in the rock somewhere, or been eaten by a mountain lion. Ford knows. E o Deus deles, não existe Deus. O Deus dele é o Tom Ford. Acho que é Tom Ford. Aquele criador da forma de trabalho, né? O Fordismo. Aquele carro, né? Ford, a marca Ford. Então eles todas as horas falam, oh Ford, como se fosse oh Lord. Mas é Ford que é o Deus dele. Anyhow, it was horrible. It upset me very much at the time, more than it ought to have done. I must have had a terrible shock, said Bernard. You must have had. At the sound of his voice, the director looked sharply at him and handed him the permit. Angry with himself and having told Bernard the secret from his past, he directed his anger at Bernard. And I should like to take this opportunity, Mr. Marks, he went on, of saying that I'm not at all pleased with the reports of your behavior outside working hours. You may say that this is not my business, but it is. I've had a good time of the center to think of. My workers must be beyond criticism, particularly those of the highest class. O Bernard Marx é um dos rebeldes aqui. Ele não se contenta com esse tipo de doutrina que tem na sociedade. Ele busca por mais. Ele não quer ser só satisfeito. Ele fala que ele tem uma passion. Ele tem esse desejo de ser mais do que satisfeito pelo governo. Ele quer ser muito feliz. Ele quer buscar a paixão dele. Então ele é meio rebelde, assim. Ele é um dos alfas, mas ele não tem aparência de alfa, né? Ele é meio magrelo e ele é meio julgado pela equipe dele, pelo chefe. Só que ele é muito inteligente, então eles precisam dele para trabalhar. And so, Mr. Marx, I gave you fair warning. If I ever have any complaint again about your failure to submit to our rules for social behavior, I shall ask you to be moved to a sub-center, perhaps to Iceland. Good morning. And turning away, he picked up his pen and began to write. Then I will teach him, he said to himself. But he was mistaken, for Bernard left the room with a joyful feeling that he stood alone against the whole of the social order, with the sense of his individual importance. He was not even frightened by the director's threats. He felt strong enough to resist severe treatment, strong enough to face even Iceland. And in any case, he didn't believe that he would be called coupon to fix anything at all. People are removed for things like that. Iceland was just a threat. Walking along the passage, he actually whistled. The journey was quite uneventful. The Blue Pacific rocket was 2.5 minutes early at New Orleans. Lost 4 minutes in a storm over Texas, but then he flew into favorable, favorable air current and was able to land at Santa Fe, less than a 40 seconds behind at the official time. 40 seconds on a 6.5 hour flight. Not so bad, said Lenina. They slept that night at Santa Fe. Lenina found all the comfort that she could have wished for. There won't be anything like this in the reservation, Bernard warned her. No television, no hot water even. You mustn't come to the reservation unless you really want to. But I do want to. Very well then, said Bernard. Their permit required the signature of the director of the reservation, to whose office they went next morning. It was full of useless information and unasked for good advice. Once started, he went on and on in the same loud, boring voice. 506,000 square kilometers divided into 4 distant suburb reservations, each surrounded by an electric fence. There is no escape. Those who were born in the reservation, and remember, dear young lady, that in the reservation children still are born. Yes, actually born. Disgusting. Though they may seem must spend their whole lives there and die there. There are about 6,000 Indians and people of mixed blood, absolute savages. Our inspector occasionally visits. Otherwise, no contact with the civilized world. They still preserve their shameful habits and customs. Marriage, if you know what that is. My dear young ladies, family, no conditioning, Christianity, an awful old belief system like that. Dead language like such as Spanish. Savage wild animals, infectious disease, priests, poisonous snakes. They got away at least. A message was sent to them at the hotel that on the director's order, a reservation guard had come round with a plane and was waiting on the roof. They went up at once. They took their seats in the plane and set off. 10 minutes later, they were crossing the border that separated civilization from savagery, up hill and down, across the desert of salt or sand, through forests, down into deep valleys, over wide plains and tall mountain tops. The fence marched on, and at its foot, here and there, pattern of white bones, a body on the ground, marked the place where a wild animal had gone too close to the deadly wires. They never learn, said the pilot, pointing down at the bones on the ground below them. And they never will learn, he said, laughing as if at a joke. Bernard, having taken 2 grams of sauna, went to sleep and woke at last to find the machine standing on the ground. Lenina carrying a suitcase into a small square house, and the pilot talking some language that he could not understand with a young Indian. Malpal, explained the pilot as Bernard stepped out. This is the rest house, and there is a dance this afternoon at the village. He'll take you there. He pointed to the young savage, who appeared unwilling. It will be funny, I expect. Everything they do is funny. And with that, he climbed into the plane and started up the engines. Back tomorrow, and remember, he added 4 Lena's benefit. They are perfectly alright. Savages won't do you any harm. They've got enough experience of gas bombs to know that they mustn't play tricks. Still laughing, they moved the controls. rose into the air and was gone. Chapter 7. Among the Savages. The flat-topped rock rose up from the yellow dust plain of a valley through which ran a river between high, steep banks. On the top of the rock was the Indian village of Malpad, block above block, each story smaller than the one below. The tall houses rose in gray stone, stepping to the blue sky. At their feet lay an untidy group of low buildings. On three sides, the tall rocks fell straight down into the plain. A few columns of smoke rose into the still air and were lost. Strange, said Linnea. Very strange. That was what she called anything that did not please her. I don't like it, and I don't like that man. She pointed to the Indian guy who had been pointing to take them up to the village. He clearly did not like them either. Even the back of the man, as he walked along, seemed to express his hatred of them. Besides, she lowered her voice. He smells. Bernard did not attempt to deny it. They walked on. Suddenly, it seemed as though the whole air had come alive and was beating with a tireless movement of blood. Up there in Malpa, the drums were being beaten. Their feet began to obey the beat of the mysterious heart. They walked more quickly. Their path led them to the foot of the rock. Its size rose above them like a great tower, 90 meters to the top. I wish we could have bought a plane, said Lenina, looking up with dislike at the blank rock face. I hate walking, and you feel so small when you're on the ground at the bottom of a hill. They walked along for a time in the shadow of the rock, turned a corner, and there, in a dry tunnel worn away by the water, in former times was the way up. They climbed. It was a very steep path. They went from side to side of the channel. Sometimes the drums were almost silent, at others they seemed to be beating only just around the corner. When they were halfway up, a large bird flew past so close to them that they felt the cold wind from his wings on their faces. In a crack in the rock lay a pile of bones. It was all frighteningly strange, and the Indians smelled stronger and stronger. They emerged at last from the channel into the full sunlight. The top of the rock was a flat platform of stone, like the Charing Tea Tower, said Lenina, comforting herself with the memory of something familiar and safe. But she was not allowed to enjoy this comforting comparison for long. The sound of soft footsteps made them turn around, naked from throat to waist. Their dark brown bodies painted with white lines, like clay tennis courts. Nina was later to explain. Their faces wild, not human, painted red, black, and yellow. Two Indians came running along the path. Fox fur and pieces of red cloth and birds' feathers were twisted into their black hair. Great brightly colored headdresses rose above their faces. With every step they took, their silver jewelry shook in the bones and colored stones their necklace knocked against each other. They came on without a word, running quietly in their animal skin shoes. One of them was holding a feather brush, the other carrying in each hand what looked at a distance like 3 or 4 pieces of thick rope. One of the ropes moved and twisted, and suddenly Lenina saw that they were snakes. The men came near and near. Their dark eyes looked at her, but without the smallest sign that they had seen her or were aware of her existence. The twisting snakes hung still in with the rest. The man passed. I don't like it, Lena said. I don't like it. She laid even later she found at the entrance to the village where their guide had left them while he went inside for instruction. The dirt to start with, the piles of rubbish, the dust, the dogs, the flies. Her face showed how disgusting she found it. She held her hand to her nose. But how can they live like this? She cried, hardly able to believe her own eyes. They have been doing it for the last 5 or 6,000 years, said Bernard. So I suppose they must be used to it by now. But cleanliness is next to frowliness, she insisted. Yes, in civilization and sterilization. Bernard went on with a little smile. But these people have never heard of our fort, and they aren't civilized, so there is no point in. Oh, she held his arm. Look! An almost naked Indian was very slowly climbing down the ladder on the first floor of one of the houses, with the trembling carefulness of extreme old age. His face was deeply lined and black. The toothless mouth had fallen in at the corners of the lips and of each side of the chin. A few long hairs shone almost white against the dark skin. The long, untidy hair hung down in gray threads around his face. His body was bent, nothing but skin and bone. Very slowly he came down, pausing at each step before he placed a foot carefully on the one below. What's the matter with him? Whispered Lenina. Her eyes were wild with all her in shock. He too was shocked, but he made an effort to seem unmoved. Old? She repeated. But the director's old. Lots of people are old. They are not like that. That's because we don't allow them to be like that. We preserve them from diseases. We keep their body in good condition by scientific treatment. We give them young blood at regular intervals. We keep their body system working perfectly. So of course they don't look like that. Partially, he added, because most of them die long before they reach this old creature's age. Youth almost perfectly preserved to 60, then cracked the end. But Lenina was not listening. She was watching the old man. Slowly he came down. His feet touched the ground. He turned. His deep sunken eyes were still extraordinarily bright. They looked at her for a long moment without expression, without a surprise, as though she had not been there at all. Then slowly, with bent back, the old man walked painfully past them and was gone. But it's terrible, Lenina whispered. It's awful. We ought not to have come here. She felt in her pocket for her summer, only to discover that by some mistake she had left the bottle down at the harassed house. Bernard's pockets were also empty. Lenina was left to face the horrors of Malpine's united. They came crowding in on her. The sight of two young women giving their breasts to their babies made her redden and turn away her face. She had never seen anything so shocking in all her life. And what made it worse was that instead of pretending to take no notice of it, Bernard kept on making open remarks about the disconcerting animal scene. He went out of his way to show how strong an individual he was. At this moment, their guide came back, making signs to them to follow. led the way down a narrow street between the houses. A dead dog was lying on a rubbish pile. A woman with a badly swollen neck was combing the dirt from the hair of a small girl. Their guide stopped at the foot of the ladder and then pointed upwards and forwards. They obeyed the sign, climbed the ladder, and walked through a doorway at the top into a long, narrow room, red and dark and smelling of cooked fat and dirty clothes. At the further end of the room was another doorway, through which came a beam of sunlight and the noise very loud and close of the drums. They went through the door and found themselves outside again. Below them, shading by the tall houses, was the village square, crowded with Indians, bright cloths and feathers and black hair, and jewels and dark skin shining in the sun. Nina put her hand to her nose. The open space in the center of the square were two circular platforms of bricks and beaten clay. The roofs, it was clear, of the underground chambers, for in the center of each platform was an open lid, with ladder coming up from the lower darkness. The sound of pipeline came up from below and almost lost in the steady beat of the drums. Nina liked the drums. Shutting her eyes, she listened to their soft, repeated thunder. But she opened them again at a sudden burst of singing, hundreds of male voices crying out loudly together. A few long notes in silence, then the women's whisper, thin and high. Then again the drums, and once more the deep, savage cries of the men. Suddenly, there came up from those round underworld chambers a frightening band of trained beings, wearing ugly masks or with faces painted so that they looked like nothing human. They circled in a strange dance round the square, round and round again, singing as they went round and round, each time a little faster, and the beat of the drums grew quicker, so there was like a fever blood in their ears, and the crowd began to sing with the dancers louder and louder. And first one woman screamed, and then another one, and another, as thought they were being killed. And then suddenly the leader of the dancers left the circle, ran to a big wooden chest which was standing at one end of the square, raised the lid and pulled out a pair of black snakes. A great cry went up from the crowd, and all the other dancers went towards him with their hands stretched out. He threw the snakes to those who arrived first, and then put his hand into the chest and drew once more. And then the dance began again to a different beat. Round they went with their snakes, twisting and turning their bodies as if they were snakes themselves, round and round. Then the leader gave a signal, and one after other, all the snakes were thrown down in the middle of the square. An old man came up from underground and scattered seeds over them, and from the other chamber came a woman and threw water over them, a black bottle. Then the old man lifted his hand, and suddenly there was absolute silence. The drums stopped beating. Life seemed to have come to an end. The old woman pointed to the two entrances to the lower world, and slowly raised by hand from below. There came up from the one painted image of a large bird, from the other that of a man, naked and nailed to a cross. The old man shook his left hand with his right, naked except for a white cotton cloth around his waist. A boy of about 18 stepped out of the crowd and stood before him, his hand crossed over his chest. His head went forward. The old man made the sign of the cross over him and turned away. Slowly the boy began to walk around and twisting piles of snakes. Among the dancers, a tall man wearing the mask of mountain lion and holding in his hand a leather whip advanced towards them. The boy moved on and thought he had not noticed the other's existence until the lion raised his whip. There was a long pause, then a quick movement, then the whistle of the whip through the air, through the and the loud, quiet sound of the blow falling on flesh. The boy's body trembled, but he made no sound. He walked on at the same slow, steady pace. The whip struck again and again, and a fairy blew. First a low cry, and then a deep shout went up from the crowd. The boy walked on twice, 3 times, 4. He went round the piles of snake. The blood was streaming 5 times, 6 times. Suddenly, Lenina covered her face with her hands and began to cry. "Oh, stop then, he begged. But the whip fell and fell without pity. 7 times round, suddenly the boy fell forward on his face, still without a sound. Bending over him, the old man touched his back with a long white feather, held it up for a moment, red with blood for the people to see. Then shook it 3 times over the snakes. Jesus, esse livro é muito pesado. Ele é muito detalhado. Estão detalhando aqui quase que sem explicar, que fez com Jesus. Colocaram ele na cruz e bateram, né? É meio que isso. Porque estão descrevendo aqui savages como se fossem as pessoas longe da civilização, né? Eles falam Indians. Então não sei se é indígenas ou se são indianos. Mas é como se eles tivessem costumes cristãos e aí estão batendo aqui costumes de uma tribo, como se fosse isso. Meu Deus, tô chocada. A few drops fell, and suddenly the drums broke out again in a river of hurrying notes. There was a great shout. The dancers rushed forward, picked up the snakes, and ran out the square. Men, women, children, all the crowd ran after them. A minute later, the square was empty. Only the boy remained flat on his face, where he had fallen quite still. 3 old women came out of one of the houses and with some difficulty lifted him and carried him in. The bird and the man on the cross kept guard for a little while over the empty square. Then, as though he had seen enough, sank slowly down below the ground, out of sight into the lower world. Lenina was still crying. Too awful, she kept repeating. Too awful, that blood. She trembled violently. Oh, I wish I had some soma. I had my soma. There was the sound of feet in the inner room. Lenina sat without moving, her face buried in her hand. Only Bernard turned around. The dress was of the young man who now came towards them was Indian, but his hair was yellow, his eyes pale blue, and his skin a white skin of the sunburn. "Hello, good day," said the stranger in hard but odd English. "You're civilized, aren't you? You come from the other place, outside the reservation." "Who on earth?" Bernard began in surprise. The young man shook his head. "I most unhappy gentleman," and pointed to the blood in the center of the square. "Do you see that?" he asked in a voice that trembled with emotion. "Oh, I wish I had my son," cried Lenina from behind her hands. "I had to have been there," the young man went on. "Why wouldn't they let me be the sacrifice? I have gone round 10 times, 12, 15. Penalty, but only got as far as 7. They could have had twice as much blood for me, enough to turn the seas red." He threw his arms out wide, then left them fall again in hopelessness. "But they won't let me. They dislike me for the color of my skin. It's always been like that, always. Tears stood in the young man's eyes. He was ashamed and turned away. The shock made Lenina forget all about her summer. She took her hands away from her face and, for the first time, looked at the stranger. Do you mean to say that they wanted to be hit with that whip? The young man nodded. For the sake of the village, to make the rain come and the corn grow, and to please Pukon and Jesus, and then to show that I can bear pain without crying out. Yes, and his voice suddenly grew firmer. He turned to her, lifting his head proudly. To show that I'm a man, he drew in his breath sharply and was silent, staring. He had seen for the first time in his life the face of a girl whose cheeks were not the color of chocolate or dog skin, whose hair was golden and beautiful, and who looked at him kindly, something he was not used to. Lenina was smiling at him. Such a nice looking boy, she was thinking, and really beautiful body. The blood rushed up into the young man's face. He dropped his eyes, raised them again for a moment, only to find her smiling at him. And he was so full of new, strange feelings that he had to turn away and pretend to be looking very hard at something on the other side of the square. Bernard broke in with a number of questions. Who? How? When? Keeping his eyes fixed on Bernard's face, for his desire to see Lenina smiling was so strong that he simply dared not to look at her. The young man tried to explain himself. Linda was his mother. The world made Lenina look uncomfortable. Were strangers in the reservation. Linda had come from the other place long ago, before he was born, with a man who was his father. Bernard listened eagerly. She had gone walking alone in these mountains over there to the north, had fallen down a steep place and hurt her head. Go on, said Bernard excitedly. Some hunter from Malpa had found her and brought her to the village. As for the man who was his father, Linda had never seen him again. His name was Tomakin. Yes, Thomas, but the GHC first name. He must have flown away back to the other place, away without her. A bad, unkind, unnatural man. And so I was born in Malpass. He ended in Malpass, and he shook his head. Remember, the ugliness of the little house on the edge of the village, a space of dust and rubbish separated from the village. Two hungry dogs were pushing their noses hungrily into their rubbish at its door. Inside, when they entered, the air smelled strongly and it was loud with flies. Linda, the young man called. From the inner room, a woman's voice said thickly, "Coming." They wanted in balls on the floor were the remains of a meal, perhaps of several meals. The door opened. A very large yellow-haired woman came in and stood staring at the strangers, her mouth wide open in surprise. Lenina noticed with horror that two of the front teeth were missing, and the color of the ones that remained, she could hardly look. So fat in the loose hanging cheeks, all rough and purple, and all the lines in her face and the blood marks on her nose and in her eyes, in the neck, and the cloth she wore over her head torn and dirty. And under the brown cloth that she wore over her body, there was enormous breasts, The great round stomach, oh, much worse than the old man, much worse. And suddenly the creature burst into a flood of speech, rushed at her with her arms stretched out, and Ford, it was too horrible. In another moment she would be sick, held Lenina tightly to her fat body and began to kiss her. Ford, such wet kisses, and she smelled too horrible, obviously never had a bath, and she had been drinking some very strong alcohol. Lenina broke free as quickly as she could. A twisted face stared at her. The creature was crying. Oh, my dear, if only knew how glad, after all these years, a civilized face. Yes, and civilized clothes, because I thought I should never see a piece of real artificial silk again. And those lovely shorts. Do you know, dear, I have still got my old clothes, the ones that came in, put away in a box. I'll show them to you afterwards. Of course, the cloth has all gone into holes. I suppose John has told you what I had to suffer. Not a grain of salmon to be had, only a drink of mezcal every now and then. And Pope used to bring it. Pope is a boy I used to know, but it makes you feel so bad afterwards. The Mexico does, and sick. Besides, it always made that awful feeling of being ashamed, much worse the next day, and I was so ashamed to think of it. Me, a better, having a baby. Put yourself in my place. The nurse suggested made Lenina tremble, though it wasn't my fault. I swear, I still don't know how it happened, because I did all that I was supposed to. But all the same, it happened. She drew a deep breath, shook her head, opened her eyes again, then blew her nose on her fingers and wiped it on her skirt. Oh, I'm so sorry, she said, seeing Lenina look of disgust. I shouldn't have done that. But what are you to do here? Linda shook her head. I tried to tell them about disease and about keeping things clean when I first came here, but they didn't understand. And in the end, I suppose I got used to it. Anyhow, how can you keep things clean when there isn't any running hot water? And look at those clothes. This horrible wool isn't like artificial material. It never wears out. At last and lasts. And you're supposed to amend it if it gets torn. But I'm a better. I work in the fertilizing room. Nobody ever taught me to do anything like that. It wasn't my business. Besides, it never used to be right to mend clothes. Throw them away when they've got holes in them and buy new. The more stitches, the less riches. But it's always different here. Like living with mad people. Everything they do is mad. She lowered her voice. Take the way they have one another here. Mad, I tell you. Absolutely mad. Everyone belongs to everyone else, don't they? She whispered, pulling at Lenina's arm. Lenina nodded, turned her head away from the smell of Linda's breath. Well, here, the other went on. Nobody's supposed to belong to more than one person. If you have people in the ordinary way, the others think you're bad. Once a lot of women came and shouted at me because their men came to see me. Well, why not? And then they rushed at me. No, it was too awful. I can tell you about it. Linda covered her face with her hand and cried. They are so hateful here, the women. Mad and cruel. And of course they don't know anything about bottles or contraceptives. So they are having children all the time, like dogs. It is too disgusting. Just think that Ford. And yet, John was a great comfort to me. I don't know what I should have done without him. Even though he did get so upset. I never met quite a tiny boy once, but that was when he was bigger. He tried to kill poor white Pussy. Or was it Pope? just because I used to have them sometimes. Because never could make him understand that that's what civilized people should do. Be mad sketching, I believe. Anyhow, John seemed to have caught from the Indians because of course he was with them a lot. Even though they were so kind to him and wouldn't let him do all the things the other boys did, which was a good thing in a way, because it made it easy for me to condition him a little. But you have no idea how difficult that is. There's so much one doesn't know. It wasn't my business to know. I mean, when a child asks you how a helicopter works, who made the world, well, what are you answer? What are you to answer if you're a beta and have always worked in the fertilization? What do you answer? Nossa. Capítulo 8, 9, 10. Conta quantos? 13, 16, Jesus. Acho que eu tô na metade ainda. Que preguiça desse livro. É mais pra praticar inglês. Nossa, pelo que eu lembrava, o chocolate daqui era bom. Mas só tem coisa ruim, cara. É isso.